I decided to read to you an excerpt from one of my books that I find very interesting called The French Revolution. It was written by a lady named Nesta Webster, very early 1900s. She herself was a very controversial figure for her time. Uh, she is basically written off as a conspiracy theorist, and clearly some of that is interlaced in her works. But her take on the French Revolution is very interesting and unique in that it is not the mythology French historians would foist upon the world. Whereas the French would look at the French Revolution purely as a form of spontaneous lower class uprising that would do away with the monarchy. Her take on it is more of a establishment view, essentially elements of the establishment conspiring to take down the existing order. Another take that puts her in an interesting camp is that she would be essentially a Tory or a pro-royalist. So she has a very favorable view of King Louis compared to all the other people who had to essentially turn him into a demon to make him worthy of the fate he would eventually receive. So she definitely has her biases, but the thing is they're not dismissible outright. And if you take her work in conjunction with uh, more accepted viewpoints on the revolution, I think it helps mitigate the incredible bias that comes from uh, the French who want to mythologize their own revolution. Uh, so, uh, not everything she writes, I would say, is something one could take as gospel, but it is something you should use to weigh against the other sources. So, without that, I shall begin. Just recall that I am not well versed on French, so if I butcher a pronunciation, please forgive me. From the Duc d'Orleans. Quote, they did not bargain. They gave what was asked. The farmers and the monopolizers alone profited by this maneuver. The artisan, the laborer, the poor man could not afford the price that the monopolizers offered, and it was only by outbidding them that the government succeeded in wresting from these vampires a portion of their spoil. Unquote. Whether then the Orleanists achieved their purpose by actually cornering supplies or by terrorizing the farmers into holding them up, there can be no doubt that the famine of 1789 was deliberately engineered by agents of the Duke, and that by this means the people were driven to the pitch of desperation necessary to produce the revolution. The Orleanists, however, did not constitute the only revolutionary element within the country. A second intrigue was at work amongst the people, that of the subversives. These men desired no change of dynasty or in the government. Their aim was purely destructive. 3 years later, when the monarchy was abolished, many of the revolutionary leaders declared that they had all along been Republicans at heart. But if we examine their earlier writings, we shall find that at the beginning of the revolution, none of them had formulated any such political creed. Quote, there was not 10 of us Republicans in 1789. Camille Desmoulins wrote afterwards, and since Camille at this date was one of the Duc d'Orleans' most enthusiastic admirers, the number may be reduced by at least one. With the exception of perhaps Lafayette, whose experiences in the American War of Independence inspired him with Republican sympathies. Those of the earlier revolutionaries who were not Orleanists had no definite theories of Reconstruction. Their aim was merely to clear the ground of all existing conditions. Quote, "All memories of history," said Barré, "all prejudices resulting from community of interest and of origin, all must be renewed in France. We wish only to date from this today, to make the people happy," said Ribald de Saint-Antoine. Quote, "Their ideas must be reconstructed, laws must be changed, morals must be changed, men must be changed, things must be changed, everything, yes, everything must be destroyed, since everything must be remade." These subversive theories emanated from certain secret societies, of which an English writer calling himself John Robison described the aims in the title of his books, Proofs of a Conspiracy Against the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of the Freemasons, Illuminati, and the reading societies. Robison, who himself a genuine Freemason, made a tour of the Continental Lodges, where he found that a new and spurious form of Masonry had sprung into existence. Both in France and Germany, the lodges had become the haunts of many projectors and fanatics, both in science and religion, and in politics, who had availed themselves of the secrecy and the freedom of speech maintained in these meetings. In their hands, Freemasonry became a thing totally unlike jumped the wrong way, pardon me. Unlike and almost in direct opposition to the system imported from England, where the rule was observed that nothing touching religion or government shall ever be spoken in the lodges. The association, in fact, was all a cheat, and the leaders disbelieved every word they uttered and every doctrine that they taught. Their real intention was to abolish all religion, overturn every government, and make the world a general plunder and wreck. A further development of German Freemasonry was the Order of the Illuminati, founded in 1776 by Dr. Adam Weishaupt, a professor of the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria. Weishaupt, who had been educated by the Jesuits, succeeded in persuading two other ex-Jesuits to join him in organizing the new order. And it was no doubt that this circumstance gave rise to the belief entertained by certain contemporaries that the Jesuits were the secret directors of this sect. The truth is probably that both Mirabeau and the Marquise de Luchet, in their pamphlets on the Illuminati, asserted Illuminism was founded on the regime of Jesuits, although their religious doctrines were diametrically opposed. Weishaupt, whom M. Louis Blanc described as, quote, "one of the deepest conspirators that ever existed," had adopted the name of Spartacus, the leader of the insurrection of the slaves in ancient Rome, and he aimed at nothing less than world revolution. Thus the Order of the Illuminati, quote, abjured Christianity, advocated sensual pleasures, and believed in annihilation, and called patriotism and loyalty narrow-minded prejudices incapable with universal benevolence. Unquote. Further, quote, they accounted all princes, usurpers and tyrants, and all privileged orders as their abettors. They meant to abolish the laws which protected property accumulated by long-continued and successful industry, and to prevent for the future any such accumulation they intended to establish universal liberty and equality, the imperceptible rights of man, and as preparation for all this they intended to root out all religion and ordinary morality, and even break the bonds of domestic life, by destroying the veneration for marriage vows, and by taking the education of children out of the hands of parents. These were precisely the principles followed by the subversives of France in 1793 and 1794, and the method by which this project was carried out is directly traceable to Weishaupt's influence amongst the Illuminati. Nothing was so frequently discoursed as to the propriety of employing, for a good purpose, the means which the wicked employed for evil purposes, and it was taught that the preponderancy of good in the ultimate result consecrated every means employed, and that the wisdom and virtue consisted in properly determining this balance. This appeared big with danger, because it seemed evident that nothing would be scrupled at, if it could be made to appear that the order would derive advantage from it, because the great object of the order was held superior to every other consideration. It is this doctrine that provides the key to the whole policy of the leading revolutionaries of France, and that, as we shall see later, brought about the Reign of Terror. Quentin Crawford, the friend of Marie Antoinette, writing to Pitt in 1794, remarked, quote, "There is a great resemblance between the maxim, as far as they are known, of the Illumines and the early Jacobins, and I am persuaded that the seeds of many of these extravagant but diabolical doctrines that spread with such unparalleled luxuriance in the hotbeds of France were carried from Germany. The lodges of the German Freemasons and the Illuminati were thus the source whence emanated these anarchic schemes and culminated in the terror. And it was at a great meeting of the Freemasons in Frankfurt am Main, 3 years before the French Revolution began, that the deaths of Louis XVI and Gustavus III of Sweden were first planned. The Orleanist leaders were quick to see an opportunity for advancing their own interests, joined the Freemasons, and the Duc d'Orléans succeeded in getting himself elected Grand Master of the Order in France. A little later, Mirabeau went to Berlin, and whilst in Prussia, attracted the attention of Spartacus and his colleague Philo, alias the Baron Nigi of Frankfurt am Main, who, through the influence of Marvillion, a disciple of Philo's, persuaded him to become Illuminatus. On his return to Paris, Mirabeau, together with Talleyrand and the Duc de Lauzun, inaugurated a lodge on that order, but none of the three, being as yet adepts, were obliged to apply to the headquarters for aid. Accordingly, 2 Germans were sent to initiate them further in the doctrines of the sect. Before long, the Club Breton and the First Revolutionary Club, later known as the Club des Jacobins, became the center of Illuminism and Freemasonry, for all its members were also members of the 2 secret societies. But through the leading Orleanists were all Freemasons were not Orleanists. Some were pure subversives, and M. Gustave Bord is no doubt right in stating that the Duke was the only visible head of the sect, whose members used him as cover for their designs, whilst he and his supporters used them with the same object. Chamfort, having remarked that it would not be a bad thing to level all ranks and abolish the existing of orders of things, Marmontel replied, quote, "Equality has always been the chimera of republics and the bait that ambition offers to vanity. But this leveling down is all the more impossible in a vast monarchy, and in attempting to abolish everything, it seems to me that we should go further than the nation expects and further than it wishes." "True," said Camfort, "but does the nation know what it wishes? One can make it wish, and one can make it say what it has never thought. The nation is a great herd that only thinks of browsing, and with good sheepdogs and shepherds can lead it as they please. He went on to explain that one must help the people according to one's own lights, not according to theirs, and spoke cheerfully of a revolution that would make a clean sweep of the old regime, a scheme he thought by no means impossible to carry out, for though it might be difficult to move the industrious citizens, there are always the class that has nothing to lose and everything to gain, which could be stirred up by rumors of massacre, famine, and so forth. The Duc d'Orleans, he ended by remarking, must be made use of for this purpose. When to this, Marmontel suggested that the Duke had hardly the makings of a leader, Chamfort replied, "You are right, and Marbot, who knows him well, says it would be building on mud to count on him. But he has identified himself with the popular cause, he bears an imposing name, he has millions to distribute, and he hates the king and hates the queen still more." Such, then, were the democratic principles of the subversives, and the methods described by Chamfort were, as we shall see, precisely those employed to work up the people. The first item on their program was the systematic dissemination of class hatred and the promise of an unlimited booty. Quote, "Name me as your representative at the States General," said Robespierre in his electioneering speeches, "and you will be forever exempt from those burdens which have so far been required on the pretext of the needs of the states. This will not be the only benefit you will enjoy if I succeed in becoming one of your representatives. Too long have the rich been the sole possessors of happiness. It is time that their possessions should pass into other hands. The castles will be overthrown, and all the lands belonging to them will be distributed among you in equal portions. To the agricultural laborers he promised the fields they cultivated, and to the retainers of the nobles he offered freedom from all duties. Everything will be changed, for masters will become servants, and you'll become served in your turn. It will be seen, therefore, that from the outset, equality, the great watchword of the Revolution, had no place in the minds of the subversives. Conditions were simply to be reversed. Wealth was to change hands, a process that was to be never-ending, since that which was on the top was to be perpetually thrust to the bottom, and that which was on the bottom raised to the top. Towards religion, the subversives displayed the same attitude as towards government. Their animosity was not directed against the Church of Rome more than against Protestantism. It was religion itself they detested, and they set out to destroy. When we study the manner in which they carried out their design, when we read of the frightful profanity that was inaugurated during the Terror, the desecration of the churches, the blasphemies against Christ and the Holy Virgin, and the worship of Marat, it is almost impossible to disbelieve the demoniacal possession, to doubt that these men, inflamed with hatred against all spiritual influences working for good in the world, became indeed the vehicles for those other spirits, the powers of darkness, whose cause they had made their own. And in their hideous deaths, for nearly everyone perished on the scaffold, were they not, perhaps, like the Gadarene swine, victims of the demons that drove them to destruction? Now, I do like her prose. It's fun stuff for sure. Other one. So, just give you a little bit of a taste of it. I think it's a fairly, because of her writing style, the reading flows fairly well. Because it's a slightly older style, and as an educated English woman, she was well versed in Latin and French, so Latin and French pops up a lot with the assumption that you should know what they mean, and this will kind of slow you down. So it's not a book you could plow through, but it's not a book that's an absolute chore to read either. But essentially, you're required to, unless you're really good with Latin and French, stop from time to time to understand the references she's making. So I hope that whetted your appetite. And again, not everything she's saying should be taken as gospel, but she is um, basically counter narrative. And I don't think she's intentionally counter narrative. Uh, she looked at sources, she came up with her own narrative, and I think elements of her narrative are probably decently correct. In considering the caricature that most historians have of the French Revolution, uh, this is definitely needed as a tool to help fill out uh, something that's a lot closer to reality. So, if you have any thoughts on this, feel free to comment below. Primarily, uh, have you heard of Nesta Webster before? If you know her as a controversial figure, do you think the controversies surrounding her are legitimate, or is she a figure of history that's been basically dragged down because they didn't like the message? If the YouTube algorithm brought you here, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you think there's somebody out there who might like this, share it with them. And please consider smashing the like button. All right, thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.